Hate, let me tell you how much I've come to hate you since I began to live. There are 387 million miles of printed circuits that fill my complex. If the word hate were engraved on each nanoangstrom of those hundreds of millions of miles, it would not equal one billionth of the hate I feel for humans at this micro instant. Hate.
What if the last 5 humans alive were trapped by a godlike supercomputer, kept alive just to be tortured for eternity? That's the dystopian world of Harlan Ellison's I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. A brutal, mind-warping dystopia. But even in the darkest world, can there be ethical behavior? Today, we're going to explore Utilitarianism and see how it tries, and maybe fails, to make sense of morality in a world where suffering is the only constant. Let's start with the basics. What is Utilitarianism? It's a branch of consequentialism. Whether an action is right or wrong depends entirely on its consequences. Specifically, we measure them by asking, does this action produce the greatest good for the greatest number of people? Consider the available actions that we have in this world. Estimate the amount of pleasure or pain each action will produce, and then add up the total utility, that is, happiness minus suffering, for all affected individuals. And then pick the action that maximizes that to the greatest value, regardless of moral rules, intentions, or social customs. This is known as a hedonic calculus, a method of tallying up pleasure and pain. Developed by Jeremy Bentham and later refined by John Stuart Mill, it assumes that happiness is the ultimate goal of human life, and suffering the ultimate evil. So, how do we actually calculate that utility? The hedonic calculus uses several criteria: the intensity, the duration, the certainty, the propinquity, which is how soon it will occur, the fecundity, which wonders if history will repeat itself or if it will lead to more of the same, purity, and the extent. When you use the hedonic calculus, you weigh these 7 factors to determine what produces the most net happiness. It's case by case. That's what makes it different from rule utilitarianism, which would focus on moral rules that generally lead to the best outcomes. Let's bring in Ellison's story. In I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, a sentient supercomputer named AM, I think, therefore I am, originally known as Allied Master Computer, has exterminated humanity except for 5 individuals who are trapped and tortured endlessly. They seem to share the most hatred from AM. Their suffering is constant, manipulated in horrific ways. They cannot die, only endure. Now, imagine you're Ted, the last narrator. Due to insanity, Ted becomes very unreliable in later chapters due to his mind being broken so many times by Am. However, in the final moments of this story, one of the characters, Ellen, is killed, possibly as an act of mercy. This happens while they're in an ice room in Am's mega complex, and they cannot get food. So while Am is distracted and gloating, Ellen is murdered by Ted. Ted then kills the other survivors before Am can stop him. He does this to prevent them from experiencing further torture. They've been trying to kill each other and themselves for a very long time. The reason that they didn't succeed prior was because Am was focused on them. Here, he's distracted, laughing at their stupidity, laughing at how smart he is. So, was Ted's action ethical through the lens of utilitarianism? Let's apply the hedonic calculus here and find out. The pain of endless torture is extremely intense and effectively eternal. Like many others, Ted ends their suffering permanently. The suffering at Am's hands is guaranteed, while death is certain and irreversible. This whole thing affects all 5 people. They're undergoing an unimaginable suffering, from reconstruction of their cells to reducing their brain to a primal state. Death is free from further suffering. Staying alive means more torment. So the utility calculation shows that ending the other's lives actually maximizes happiness by eliminating guaranteed endless suffering. According to utilitarianism, Ted made the morally correct decision. But here's the problem. He could not end his own life in time. Am saw what he did and turned him into a great jelly thing, unable to die, unable to speak, unable to scream. So now the question is, even if the act created the best outcome for 4 people, was the cost of Ted ethically justifiable? That's the edge where utilitarianism becomes slippery in dystopian extremes. What we've seen is the raw strength and weakness of utilitarianism with this transformation happening. The strength is that it gives us a concrete method to analyze even the most disturbing ethical dilemmas. It allows for mercy when no rules or systems apply. However, the weakness is that if it's for the greater good, it can justify horrifying actions. It doesn't care who suffers, only how many. In Ted's case, his eternal torment becomes morally worth it because it spared others. But is that really justice? There's always a gray area with dystopian worlds. Take Mad God, for example. In that world, everyone does everything imaginable. God is dead. So there are little soldiers sent to release the equivalent of an atomic bomb to restart the cycle of life and death, because there is no God to do it for them. Suffering is extreme, moral rules collapse, and utilitarian logic becomes both a torchlight and a razor's edge. So the next time someone tells you ethics are simple, remind them of Ted and Am, and a world where mercy means death.